You already know two clefs that never move. The treble clef always wraps the same line and names it G. The bass clef always hugs the same line and names it F. They are nailed down, and that is the whole reason a beginner can trust them. The G line is the G line on every page you will ever open. But there is a third kind of clef, and unlike those two, it slides up and down the staff. Wherever its center points, that line becomes middle C, same symbol, parked in a different spot, and the whole staff means something new. It looks strange the first time you meet it, a sort of bracketed shape with no obvious story, and a lot of players quietly skip past the pieces that use it. They treat it as some advanced thing meant for specialists. It is not. By the end of this you will read it as comfortably as the other two, because it is built entirely on the one note you already know best, the note sitting right in the middle of the piano. Start with the clef itself, before we pin it anywhere on the staff. The C clef is drawn as two curved halves that meet in the middle, and the place where they meet narrows to a sharp horizontal point. That point is the whole instruction. The clef does exactly one job: it aims at a line and declares, this line is middle C. Everything else on the staff is then measured from there. Listen to middle C on its own first, so your ear has the anchor before we move anything. There it is, the note right in the center of the piano, the dividing line between the left hand and the right. Now, the clef does not care which line it lands on. Press the point against the bottom line, and that bottom line is middle C. Slide the whole clef up and press the point against the top line, and now the top line is middle C, while the note itself, the actual pitch, has not changed by a hair. That is the part that trips people up, so hold on to it. The pointer moves, the staff relabels itself around the new position, but one of those 5 lines is always the exact same middle C you just heard. 2 of these positions show up often enough to have earned their own names, and we will take them one at a time. Park the point on the middle line, the third line of the 5, and you have the alto clef. Middle C now sits dead center on the staff, halfway up, which is a genuinely friendly place for a landmark to live. From that one anchor every other line and space follows by simple stepping, exactly like any staff you already read. The 5 lines, from the bottom upward, are F, A, C, E, G, with that C right in the middle. The 4 spaces, from the bottom, are G, B, D, F. You do not have to drill those as a fresh list. Listen to the 3 center notes climb through it instead, the A just below the middle line, then middle C on the center line, then the E just above. Hear how they step evenly, A, C, E, the same stepping logic as the treble and bass, just centered on a new landmark. Nothing here is actually harder than the staves you know, it is only unfamiliar, and the C parked in the middle is quietly doing all of the work for you. So who actually reads this clef day to day? Almost entirely one instrument, the viola. The viola sits in pitch right between the violin and the cello, in the gap between treble and bass, and that turns out to be exactly the problem the alto clef was made to solve. Picture a calm viola phrase sitting cleanly on the alto staff, every note resting neatly on a line or tucked into a space, easy to take in at a glance. Now write those very same notes on a treble staff instead. They sink below it, sprouting a tangle of ledger lines beneath the staff that your eye has to count one at a time, line by line, just to name a single pitch. Try it in bass clef and the opposite happens, the notes float up above the top line with ledgers stacked over them. The alto clef pulls that whole middle register back onto the 5 lines, so the player reads shapes and contours instead of counting ledger lines in both directions. The pitches never changed, only the clef sitting under them. That convenience, and almost nothing else, is the entire reason this clef exists. Now take that same C clef and slide it up by exactly 1 line, so the point comes to rest on the 4th line from the bottom. That position has its own name, the tenor clef. Middle C now lives on that 4th line, 1 rung higher up the staff than it sat in the alto clef, and every other note shifts to follow it. This one is not the property of a single instrument. The cello, the bassoon, and the trombone all red bass clef most of the time, down where their low notes naturally live, but when a passage climbs up into their higher register they switch into the tenor clef for just those bars, then drop back to bass when the music descends again. It is the very same movable C clef you already understand, no new rules to learn, simply parked one line higher and marking middle C in a place that keeps an otherwise high passage sitting comfortably on the staff. Here is why a cellist actually bothers to make that switch mid-piece. Imagine a cello climbing into a high run while still written in bass clef. The notes pile up above the top line, stacking ledger line after ledger line until the page is a thicket of little floating dashes, and the player is left counting upward in the middle of a phrase, which is the last thing you want when the music is moving quickly. Now switch that exact same run into tenor clef. Because middle C has moved up to the fourth line, those same high notes drop straight back down onto the staff, onto real lines and real spaces. The thicket clears completely. Reading goes from a slow counting exercise back to fast shape recognition, the way it should be. That is the trade the C clef quietly offers every mid-range instrument. Move the clef to suit the passage, and the notes come home to the staff where they are easy to read. So how do you actually read one of these without memorizing a whole fresh set of letters? The good news is that you do not have to. Find the line the clef points at, because that line is middle C, full stop, no counting required. That is your free landmark, handed straight to you by the symbol itself. From there you simply step, the same way you already do on every other staff. One line or space up from middle C is the next note up the scale, one step down is the next note down. So take a note sitting 2 steps above the mark C, count up from the anchor, C, D, E, and you have read it as E without having memorized a single thing. A note 1 step below the C is the B just under it. The clef hands you the anchor, and your ordinary stepping does all the rest. Read just a few notes that way, out loud, and a clef that looked completely foreign turns into nothing more than another staff with its landmark sitting in a new place. And with that, the map is complete. The treble clef holds the high notes, the bass clef holds the low ones, and the 2 movable C clefs, alto and tenor, cover the broad middle ground where the viola lives and where cellos, bassoons, and trombones climb. For clefs in total, and every instrument in the orchestra now has a tidy home on the staff, a place where its notes rest on lines and spaces instead of drowning under stacks of ledger lines. You can genuinely read all 4 of them now. And notice what never moved through any of this, the note in the center, the very same middle C you heard right at the start. The clef slid around it, the staffs relabeled themselves, but that pitch stayed put the whole time. Once you trust that one anchor, the C clef stop being a wall and turn into a convenience. Next we leave pitch behind entirely and look at the road signs of a score, the symbols that send you jumping around the page, the repeats and codas that let a 4-minute piece fit onto a single sheet of paper.